and kind of how to use them, the core basics. And today we're going to go a little bit more in depth, although not that much more in depth. Today specifically, we're going to be focusing around object methods, and especially the idea of something in JavaScript called this, THIS. I apologize beforehand if this is really hard to explain verbally because of obviously the confusion with the actual word. But when I do, I'll do my best to make sure that we do a quick primer on it and that you have a good grasp of what it is, even if we don't cover all the nuances. Okay, so first off, we start off talking about what is a method, and specifically, why is a method different from a function? The short answer is methods are actually not different. Methods are functions. The only difference as to why we call something a method is when we say something is a method, it usually means that that function, it belongs to an object. So what does it mean when we say belongs to? Well, one example is what we see here. On line 8, we define an array called countries, and on line 9, we do countries dot index of, and then we look for Brazil. Now, in this case, countries is an array, and we're calling the dot index of function. But the dot implies that the index of is a function that is tied to, that exists for the countries array. And so therefore, when we do countries dot index of, we say dot index of, we say index of is a method of countries. That is, index of is a function that is tied to the country's object, that belongs to the country's object. So the idea of a method a lot of times really is more semantic in terms of just denoting that, performance-wise, it behaves just like a function. It's just that function belongs to something else. In this case, index of belongs to countries. And then another way to think about it is index of belongs to any array. Okay, so the reason why we bring up methods here is because to show you that one, we've done plenty of methods already, especially when we did arrays, for example, right? If you remember, dot slice is a method of the array. Dot push, dot shift, dot unshift. These are all methods, right? Because they're all functions, but they're all functions that are tied to a given object. The reason why I bring it up here for this class is because, well, it's nice and all that that a bunch of methods comes pre-built in for JavaScript, but we are able to create our own methods as well. So here, I've created a grasshopper object that holds that holds 3 values, and all 3 values are strings. Now, if I actually wanted to add one more thing, another key, I can easily add a function in there as well. Just so we're clear, on line 5, my method is a key, and so by default that always has to be a string. But the value to the my method key can be anything, and in this case we've denoted it to be a function, right? On line 5, it's a function that says all it does is whenever it runs, it console logs out I'm from a method. Notice how on line 5, even though we defined it there, we haven't run it yet. In fact, the my method function has not been run a single time so far on this page. However, when we get to line 11, in order for us to call that my method function, well, we would just go to the grasshopper object. We would access the key under which that function is stored. In this case, we see that that function is stored under the my method key. So here on line 11, we call grasshopper.myMethod, and notice the open and close parentheses after my method means we actually invoke that method. Okay, so on line 11, all we're doing is we're going to the grasshopper object, we're going to the my method key, and we're accessing the value associated with that key, and we're invoking it. We're running it as if it was a function. And in this case, because it is a function, when I run it, I console log out I'm from a method. Okay, so once again, that function on line 5 through 7 there, that is a function, but here we call it a method because it's a function that is associated, that is a part of the grasshopper object. Any questions so far? Cool, awesome. So when we talk about calling or creating an object, usually when we talk about calling or creating a method, that method usually has something to do with the object that it's associated with, which kind of makes sense, right? Index of is a method that we use to search an array, and so therefore it belongs to an array. Usually methods are related to whatever it is, to whatever object it's tied to. So if here we have a quote, but if we keep moving, we'll notice how here on lines 5 through 8 we created one method called sayQuote. On lines 9 through 11 we created another method called getAge. And now if you look at line 9, getAge just returns, it takes in a given year, and what it does is it returns that year minus 1906, which I guess is the year that Grace Hopper, who's a real person, was born. So here's our kind of two loose examples of instances in which a method is associated with an object. But moving on, we're actually going to talk about something called this, which hopefully makes all of this a little bit more clear. Okay, so on line 14 there, just to kind of wrap up this part is of how do we create and call a method. On lines 5 through 8 and 9 through 11, we created two key value pairs. The keys are sayQuote and getAge, and the values are two functions. And on line 14, we call gracehopper.getAge, and then that's a function on lines 9 through 11. That function expects a value being passed in, so when we call getAge, we pass in 2018, and then that's going to return to us 2018 minus 1906, which will give us 112, and that's what we end up printing out. Okay, so once again, methods are not anything fancy. They behave just like functions. The only difference is that they are usually associated, or rather they have to be associated with an object. Okay, so let's now start transitioning over to our understanding of what this is. Okay, so here on lines 7 through 9, I've created a method called greet, and it console logs out hi, and it takes in a name, so it greets that person, that name, and says, I am Rear Admiral Hopper. Okay, notice how on line 8 there, I am Rear Admiral Hopper. That's a lot of words, right? And it's not only a lot of words, but it's actually a lot of words that we've already written. We've already written before. On line 4, we've denoted her first name is Grace. On line 5, we've denoted her last name is Hopper. And on line 6, we've denoted her last name is Rear Admiral. Now, why would this be a not ideal behavior for us to write this out every single time? Well, one example is, what if Grace Hopper gets promoted, right? What if she gets promoted or her title changes from Rear Admiral? Well, in our current code, we would need to change it on line 6, but then we will also need to change it in the greet function as well, right? We would need to update her position from Rear Admiral to whatever other position she now has. And so this is, so in programming, there's a concept called DRY, don't repeat yourself. Essentially, the idea behind don't repeat yourself is, if you find yourself typing the same things over and over and over again, it probably means that that value should be stored in a variable somewhere, and you should be using that variable rather than having to manually make the same changes in several different places. Now, here, if I look at the rank, value here, it's Rear Admiral. On line 8 there, I really should be using the rank admiral value instead. So how would that look? Well, here I still have my first, last, and rank, but now in my function, in my greet function, notice how rather than writing Rear Admiral, I am Rear Admiral Hopper, I actually now am writing Grace Hopper.rank and Grace Hopper.last. And so now I'm actually able to not only make use of the rank and last variables, which in this case is actually not that much less typing because the number of characters is approximately the same. But more importantly now, if her last name changes or if her rank changes, well, all I need to do is change it on line 7 or line 8, and that change will automatically filter down all the way to lines 10, right? So if I update her rank from Rear Admiral to, let's say, Sergeant, and I actually don't know if that's a promotion or not, but let's say we change her rank from Rear Admiral to Sergeant, well then on line 10 there, the Grace Hopper.rank variable would automatically say, great, what's the value of the rank key in the Grace Hopper object? Oh, it's Sergeant. So they would populate it there too. And now I've actually reached an ideal situation where in order for me to make the same change in several places, all I have to do is change it in one place and have everyone else read that change from that same place. Okay, so this is why on line 10, what we're doing now in terms of saying Grace Hopper.rank and Grace Hopper.last, this is a lot more efficient. However, we can actually go one step further to make it even more efficient, and that's where the idea of quote-unquote this comes in. This is a bit of a strange is a bit of a is a bit of a strange concept, and the reason why is because so far in this class, at every given moment, whenever we've used a variable, we've been able to definitively say, oh, this variable's value is this, right? And we know it to be pretty much true in all scenarios. The reason why this is a little bit trickier is because it depends on where you use this. So for the purposes that we're using it, inside of a method, this is a predefined variable and it essentially references whatever object that method is a part of. Okay, so let me say that one more time. In the context of using quote this in a method in a function, it refers to whatever object that method belongs to. So here on line 8, if I use this on line 9, well, this is being used inside a method called greet, and the greet method is tied to the gracehopper object. And so therefore, this is a reference. It's, if you remember our section on pass by value versus pass by reference, this essentially is our way of actually. I'm sorry, we're going to talk about tomorrow actually, the pass by reference versus pass by value. I apologize there, but in any case, this is basically a way for us to say whenever I use this, I am referring to the gracehopper object. And so on line 9, this dot rank is the same as saying gracehopper dot rank, and this dot last is the same as saying gracehopper dot last. So here when I greet Kate, it still prints out, hi Kate, I am Rear Admiral Hopper. Okay. The reason why we use this is that because it just makes it very, very clear that the instance that we're talking about is the object that that method is tied to at that point in time. And so one way for us to prove this is on line 7 there. We can write a method actually called getThis, and all it does is it returns whatever this is. And so on line 12, if I say let return object and it's equal to gracehopper and we invoke getThis and we capture that return value in return objects, if I was to console log out return object.first, and also if I was to check whether or not return object whether or not return object equals gracehopper, in the first case, return object.first is equal to grace. And that makes sense because return object is just the same thing as the gracehopper object. And therefore, gracehopper.first is grace. So therefore, return object.first is grace. And then secondly, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow as to what the triple equals actually means. But in this case, just take it for granted that the return object triple equal gracehopper is true, which means return object is the same thing as the gracehopper object. Any questions so far before we walk through two final examples here?
Yes. Can you repeat this? Get this function because I can get this one. So you're saying the gracehopper in line 12, let a returned object is equal to gracehopper dot get this. So we are not passing any argument over here, and it is returning as grace. So where is that grace coming from? Could you just
Okay, so here we have the gracehopper object, right? Do you see where I'm highlighted? Okay. And then we invoke .getThis, right? So that's the same as invoking this function here.
Yeah.
This function returns this. Okay. And remember what I said, this represents the object that this method is tied to. And so in this case, this is equal to gracehopper. Okay, so we're so good?
Okay. It's just returning the object name.
Yep. So then this basically gets us to a point in which we're saying it's the same as saying return gracehopper. Okay. So now this becomes gracehopper. And so if I was to write another line here, now this is the same as me writing. Cool. Cool. So then if that holds, then this becomes gracehopper.first.
Okay, right. So we are not. I was is like we were not written in the grace hopper as the first one, but you just console logged out the first. Okay, I get it.
Okay, great. Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions on our talk of either methods or this idea of this? Okay, cool. All right, then we're gonna do a few quick examples, and then that's it for today. So relatively short lecture, but we also wanted to give you some more time to practice the use of objects as well. So here, let's walk through a few more examples of instances in which we use this. Here on line 1, I have an object called calc, and it has a few key value pairs. Or num1 and num2 are both numbers. On line 4, it's a sum, it's a function. And what it does is it returns this dot num1 plus this dot num2. Similarly, we have another function on the calc object called difference, and this one returns this dot num1 minus this dot num2. So let's talk about like why it's important for us to actually use this. On line 12, if I have a console.log, I do calc.sum, okay? And when I do calc.sum, all it really does is it goes through calc, we call the sum function, right? We don't pass anything in because look at line 4, the sum function doesn't expect anything to be passed in. And what it does is it returns this dot num1 plus this dot num2, okay? So if I do this on num1, that gives me 20. This dot num2 gives me 30. So then I return 20 plus 30. So on line 12 there, I'm returning 50. Now on line 13, I then say calc.num2 equals 15. So here on line 13, I'm actually changing the value associated with the num2 key in calc. And if I try to do on line 14, if I do calc.difference, well, now when I invoke the difference function, JavaScript says, okay, great. I'm supposed to return this dot num1 and this dot minus this dot num2. What's this dot num1? It's 20. And what's this dot num2? It's 15. And so on line 13, after we change the num2 value to 15 now, in all future uses of these two functions, the sum and difference function, whenever JavaScript checks to see what the object value is for num2, it's going to see 15 now. And so on line 14, calc.difference says this dot num1 is 20, this dot num2 is 15, and therefore if I return their difference, I return back 5. Oh, sorry. I return back 5. Okay, so this is a pretty standard example of how we use this, and also why it's important for us to change it, right? Because here on line 13, the idea is I can call any function I want on line 12. I can call any method I want on line 12. On line 13 or afterwards, I have the option of changing any other values I want in the object. And then on line 14, if I choose to use that object's methods again, then the changes that I've made to the key value pairs will be reflected because I use this, right? This, whenever I use it, it's accessing the value at that point in time. Okay. The last disclaimer we'll say is that this is a massively complex topic. To the extent that even I don't understand quite a lot of the nuances of it. Right now, all we're trying to do is give you a quick primer into what this is. And so if you do see it in the wild, you're not completely caught off guard about what this is and kind of what it's trying to reference. But just know that we're trying to kind of give you a quick introduction to it. This is by no means a comprehensive explanation of what this is. Okay? So on that note, we talked about methods and how they're different from functions, i.e. they're not really in terms of performance. They're only different because a method semantically denotes that it's a part of an object as opposed to a free-floating function. We talked about creating, accessing, and running a method, right? That's just basically going to an object, creating a key, and then making the value of it a function. And therefore, we can invoke that ever like we would any standard functions. And then lastly, we did a quick intro into what this is. And once again, and when you're using it within the confines of a method, this refers to the object that method is a part of or associated to or associated with or belongs to. Any questions? All right.